It is, of course, important to consider the miraculous. Wow, what is the miraculous? Either this happens on a more physical level, you might say, or a spiritual level. Either way you are looking at that, you are entering into the realm of the miraculous, you might say, should some form of manifestation take place. Either it is on a spiritual level, or either it is as a result of the spiritual affecting the physical. If the spiritual affects the physical, then you're looking at a miraculous manifestation as a result of God's Spirit. But on the other hand, the spiritual can also be simply just that, the spiritual. And I guess there are many reasons why people get their wires crossed with all of this. And there's interesting accounts of the same, and depending upon what's on a person's mind and heart, might depend upon what he sees and how he reacts to, let's say, a said miracle. What is it a person wants out of life might determine how much he sees and how much he reads into the miraculous, the said miraculous even. I mean, some people claim they have miraculous power from God working with them, and they can even prophesy, etc., heal, or do all kinds of, let's say, countless miracles. Well, when Jesus returns, he's going to say to a lot of people are going to come running to Jesus saying, have we not done this in your name? Have we not done that? Have we not done all these miracles in your name? And Jesus is going to say, I never knew you. So, it's kind of a big, big subject, you would say, because how come these people are running to Jesus saying they've done all these miraculous things and yet they never knew the miraculous Jesus, let's say? Well, an interesting account of the miraculous Jesus and how the events that unfolded as a result of miracles that he actually did. So looking at John chapter 6, and to start here verse 4, and it's simply saying, in the Passover, a feast of the Jews was nigh. So Jesus had actually gone out. It appears into the wilderness here. Jesus went up into a mountain. There he sat with his disciples. So he's got away from what you might call the madding crowd. But the madding crowd have a way of seeking and searching Jesus out. And one of the reasons that they were doing this is because of, and a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. So he apparently, when he had, of course, when I say apparently, he had, of course, healed many people with diseases. So obviously we haven't witnessed those miracles ourselves, but it's all written down, and therefore you choose to believe, well, it must have been, there's so many miracles that Jesus did that, let's say you're a skeptic, you have to say some of them must have happened, but you choose really to believe that all of them happened. So of course I'm going to go with all. And so let's go into the miraculous Jesus and see what events unfold as a result of Jesus performing a miracle here. And of course it's a well-known miracle. It's one of those you would hear in Sunday school years ago, which can sometimes make it all seem like a fairy tale, belittle the whole thing. But when you go into the further conversations that arose out of these miracles and the events that unfolded, it becomes a more interesting read, a more adult read, let's say. So these crowds have gone out to see Jesus, the miraculous Jesus. He'd healed loads of sick people. So when Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, right? So the great crowds were now coming to Jesus. You might stop here and say, well, every preacher's dream. He preaches to the crowds and the multitudes, and the whole world sits up and listens, and everyone's in awe of everything he says. Well, it didn't quite turn out this way in the final outcome of one thing leading to another, and one event following another, and then the repercussions of that event unfolding again. And it wasn't going to turn out this way as far as big crowds coming to the miraculous Jesus. When they further heard the miraculous words of Jesus and what he had to say. So when Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company coming unto him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? I think we need to feed these people. Where are we going to? Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. So Jesus already had in his mind and his heart what he was going to do. And so he's saying to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? Well, Philip here looks at the physical situation. Of course, they had money. Philip answered him, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. So clearly they didn't have enough money to feed these people. And here's Jesus saying they should be fed. So Jesus now is going to go into the miraculous. Now, why would he do this? All these people have come running out to Jesus. They've seen people get healed, and no doubt they're there to see the miraculous Jesus, even to see further miracles. One of his disciples answered, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, there is a lad here, which have 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? So clearly the physical situation was they didn't have enough money. There was only a small boy with 2 small fishes and 5 barley loaves, and that wasn't going to feed all these people. So, and Jesus said, make them sit down. Now, there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. There's 5,000 to feed. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down. And likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. So clearly it was a massive miracle. Everyone was full. And they had 12 baskets full of bread and what have you over. Now, what was the response here from the people? This is the thing. So it's one thing performing a miracle in front of all of these people, 5,000 in fact, all now all full after eating from the hands of Jesus. Jesus breaking up 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And miraculously, out of the hands of Jesus, out of the hands of the spiritual, out of this spiritual manifestation of Jesus breaking this bread, giving it to his disciples, they breaking the bread, and miraculously out of their hands come all of this bread and these fishes. Well, the interesting response is what you might call a temptation for Jesus, of which it was not. But for your average preacher, it would introduce a very big, great temptation to them. And so you read on the danger of big crowds. And you might even say here, the danger of the miraculous. What is the danger of the miraculous? Well, if God gives you miraculous power, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to exalt God as Jesus was here? I mean, the whole point in miraculous here was to exalt God and to exalt the reality that the Saviour had indeed come. Now, this was the reason why Jesus performed these miracles, this particular miracle, in order to bring the people to him and therefore bring the people to God. So Jesus' motivation here was completely pure. But just because your motivation is pure in yourselves, that this doesn't follow that the response of the people who see these miracles is going to be pure in itself. But herein lies or lays the great temptation for your average preacher. And can your average preacher, for a start, be entrusted to perform such great miracles such as these, feeding 5,000 people with five loaves and 2 fishes? Well, interesting here when you see what temptations can come out of such a scenario where a preacher has been given the miraculous power of God. Well, Jesus clearly had the miraculous power of God here. So they gathered all these baskets up together. Then those men, when they had seen the miracles, don't forget, we got this big crowd, 5,000, they've seen these miracles. What was their response? Was their response going to be spiritual? Did they tune in to God's Spirit in seeing these miracles? Or were they looking at Jesus' flesh and not so much the miraculous here? Now, Jesus was a man of the Spirit and not a man of the flesh. Of course, he came in human flesh and was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. So he wasn't going to compromise with the flesh, or in other words, with the lust of the flesh. In other words, get out of the Spirit of God. So this is the response of the people in the audience, right? Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, "This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world." Well, what prophet were they talking about that should come into the world? Well, we'll go into that in a minute. Now, what was Jesus' response when then those men, when they had seen the miracles that Jesus did, said, "This is of a truth that prophet, oh, he's that prophet," right? Well, Jesus was indeed that prophet. But in their mind, they're thinking, that prophet. What do they mean by that prophet? Well, a prophet of the flesh. This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. Depends on how they're saying it and what they mean. Were they getting into the Spirit here, or were they getting into the flesh? Were they looking to Jesus in looking at this manifestation here, the miracle here? And of all things, they were mainly, it turns out, looking at the loaves and fishes, strangely enough. So they kind of were back to front, as it turned out. So when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, well, you think, what's wrong, Jesus? They're going to make you a king. King of what? King of the flesh, king of lust, that prophet. So they were looking more at the physical more than the spiritual. They're actually, strangely enough, looking more at the loaves and fishes. And here is a man who could feed them, who could maybe boost their economy and give them bread and food and what have you. And they're kind of looking at the economic aspects of the whole thing and how this man could be just the man they've been looking for, you might add, economically rather than spiritually. So Jesus has a hard time getting spiritual thoughts into people's heads, even when he performs miracles, because rather than see the miracles of what they are, a spiritual manifestation of the miraculous God, the miraculous Jesus operating through the Spirit, and seeing the Spirit in all this, they indeed were seeing the flesh. And when they said that prophet that should come into the world, did they even read what it says about that prophet that should come into the world? Though no doubt it appears they were referring to something that Moses had said years and years before, hundreds of years before, talking about that prophet. So what had Moses said about that prophet? So Moses had actually said this, which is interesting if you read a little further into what he said. Don't just sort of skip off the surface and see what you want to see. Well, these people were talking about that prophet being, truth be known, Moses, right? Because they ended up having a conversation with Jesus about Moses and how Moses fed the children of Israel with manna from heaven. They are more interested here in the physical aspect of the miracle itself, but not in the spiritual. But if you look deeper into the words of what that prophet was really all about, though that prophet Moses had fed the children of Israel miraculously with manna, they were no doubt seeing Jesus as being that prophet who could feed them with bread and fish, as it turned out. And therefore, maybe on an economic level, let's say, they would have food, because of course we all need, economically looking at things, we all need food. So whatever else they had in mind, you can obviously speculate, but usually it's something to do with power and all the rest of it. But let's see what that prophet said, in fact, even though that same prophet that would come, that prophet, actually Moses, had actually said, this is what Moses said in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Now, this is interesting too, because it talks about prophets and true prophets and false prophets. Jesus said in the last days there would be many false prophets in the last days, and indeed there are. And here again, like we saw what happened to Jesus, he did indeed perform a miracle here. He fed 5,000 people, but the response in them wasn't quite the response he was looking for. He was looking for the same problem Moses had, trying to get spiritual thoughts into people's heads and minds and hearts and souls, right? That were purely operating more in the physical rather than the spiritual, looking more to the flesh as opposed to looking into the spirit. Hence, you can see why there's such a thing as physical manifestations that are coming from the spiritual. And there are also more spiritual manifestations that are purely spiritual in themselves, and is more about spiritual. And the important thing to know here is the main thing that Jesus was demonstrating here was the miraculous power of God's Spirit. How, in spite of this physical world that we're living in, there is indeed a spiritual God. And the invisible things of him, God, right, are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, yes. And the natural man receiveth not of the things of the Spirit, God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. These people listening to Jesus weren't even spiritual at all, and yet they were more higher up on the said spiritual ladder, and they're quoting verses that Moses had said. But let's go a little bit deeper into what Moses had actually said about this prophet that should come. And it wasn't so much about in Moses' day, manna from heaven, feeding the multitudes with manna miraculously again, all pointing to the miraculous spiritual power of God and the miraculous as opposed to the physical world. But there is the miraculous in the spiritual realm that has got nothing to do with the physical realm at all. And there's that form of miraculous, and that was the main miraculous that Jesus was interested in getting across to these people. Well, here's what that prophet actually did say. This is Moses, and Moses is saying this in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Now, I will raise them up a prophet, right? This is the prophet that Moses said will come. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren. This is talking about Jesus, like unto thee, right? This is what the Lord says this to Moses, and Moses writes it down. So Moses, a true prophet of God, you would say, writes this down, and indeed it comes true. Because everything Moses says here comes true. It's indeed the true prophet, this prophet, Jesus, did indeed come. So Moses, you would say, is hearing from God, and he's indeed a true prophet. Hundreds of years before Jesus comes, he writes this, and this comes true. Now, this is the problem these days. You have so many people prophesying, and yet it doesn't happen. But here's a man prophesying, and it's Moses, and he's hearing from God, and God's saying to him, and he writes it down. So Moses is simply tuned into God spiritually here. There's no physical manifestation. Eventually there's going to be, which is Jesus. And so he's spiritually in tune with God. In fact, he actually spoke with God face to face. And word for word, whatever God said, he'd simply get his pen and write it down. And here it is for us to read. Spiritual manifestation of God's Spirit. Reading these words gets us into the Spirit of God because they come from God. Now he says, God is saying this to Moses, right? He's writing it down. I will raise them up. Who's I? This is God here. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee. So God's saying to Moses, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren. So Jesus was born Jewish, from among their brethren, like unto thee. And will put my words in his mouth, as he did Moses. Now, Moses used to have God's words coming into his mouth. He would speak to God, mouth to mouth, face to face. And so this prophet, Jesus, was going to be like Moses. So the spiritual manifestation here is purely spiritual. And we're talking about the words of God. The word of God, of course, is Jesus. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, like unto Moses, and will put my words in his mouth like he did with Moses. And he shall speak unto them all that I command them. So this Jesus was obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. It's one thing being obedient when it's easy, but what about being obedient when it's hard? What about being obedient when a crowd of people see you do these miracles and they come to you with a crown and want to make you king of the flesh? Would you accept that crown and then get out of the spirit and then get into the flesh? Jesus didn't. He ran away. He refused the crown. Many others would have accepted the crown, got out of the spirit and gone over to the flesh. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hear and will not hearken unto my words, and God speaking through to the world, through Jesus, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. So if we hear from Jesus and we don't obey, unto whomsoever much is given, it says, much is required, and to whomsoever little is given, little is required. So the further you go down this path, the more God speaks to you, and the more you get, the more God requires it of you. So whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. It says, actually, be not many masters, for unto you is the great condemnation. So if God speaks to you and sets you up as a leader, the great condemnation is to you if you don't hearken unto my words and obey them. Well, Jesus obviously obeyed them and refused this crown. So it goes on. But the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which clearly Moses did not hear, which I have not commanded him to speak. Well, Moses was commanded to speak these words, therefore he spoke these words, and it came true. Jesus came, the prophet that would come, right? Not so much talking about the loaves and fishes, more talking here in the realm of the miraculous. Jesus actually hearing from God directly, as Moses did. Jesus talking with God, mouth to mouth, face to face. And Jesus being totally obedient to God. Even the Son, it says, learned obedience through the things which he suffered. But the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in my name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. So in the Old Testament, quite a stark warning. How many people go around nowadays, you see them all over the internet here, saying, God said this, God said that, God prophesied and told me this and told me that. Have they never read these words? That, was it say, but the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, which they do, even that prophet shall die. Well, quite a serious consequence for putting words in God's mouth that he didn't say. Where are you getting these words from? You're promoting who? You, yourself? Are you promoting another God? And if thou say in thine heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord have not spoken? Where are we going to know what God did or didn't say? When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, right? So if it doesn't come true. When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord have not spoken. But the prophet have spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. So one thing, looking for the prophet that shall come. Another thing, looking into the original words when you read what actually it said about the prophet that should come. So the prophet that shall come is, of course, Jesus here, and Moses prophesying here and talking of the prophet that shall come. And so the prophet that did indeed come is Jesus. Well, the interesting conversation unfolds later on. These men don't stop there. Jesus refuses the crown. They come to find Jesus the next day. And so let's go here. They go looking basically to cut the story short. The day following, when people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat, right? So Jesus had saved the one wherein that his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. Howbeit there came other boats from Tiberias, nigh unto the place where they did eat bread. So you got all these people coming to Jesus that did eat bread, and they got the wrong motive. And that the Lord had given thanks, right? So Jesus broke the bread, he gave thanks to God, because the miracle was coming from God, through Jesus to the people, so he thanks God. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, neither his disciples, they also took shipping and came to Capernaum, seeking for Jesus. So they got in all these boats and they're looking for Jesus. What are they looking for? The miraculous Jesus? No, they're looking for the loaves and fishes. It's strange. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, kind of thing, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. So hang on, he's performed this massive miracle coming from the spiritual realities of God. He's fed all these people, and yet their eyes are on the flesh. Did they not understand why Jesus performed this miracle? To demonstrate the miraculous spiritual reality of God? No, they hadn't seen this. So I say unto you, ye seek me not, because so they come in all of these boats, searching everywhere for Jesus. They find him, eventually find him. They're out this side of the river, that side of the river, kind of thing, that side of the sea, this side of the sea. They eventually track him down and find him. And so they're feverishly looking for Jesus, but they tried to crown him the day before when he ran away from the crown, didn't want it. But they're not going to give up. Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. Then Jesus says, labour not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. So again, Jesus is saying, look, this is more about the spiritual rather than the flesh. You've come looking for the flesh. You've come looking for loaves of fishes. You've come for the wrong reasons. You're labouring all of this feverish activity, getting in all of these boats, searching me out. You're labouring for the flesh and not the spirit. Jesus has been sealed, sent by God. In other words, he's the Son of God. He's the living bread of God come to earth. And this is the whole point in all of these miracles, to bring us to the miraculous spiritual presence of Jesus Christ. So it goes on. Then said they unto him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? Jesus answered and said unto them, this is the work of God. This is what you should be looking into. This is what you should be seeking. And these here are getting into the flesh. Others might want this miraculous power of God so they too can get in the flesh and perform all these miracles and be crowned as some kind of great prophet or great king. Well, interestingly enough, here these are looking at more of the economic prospects of this man who could turn bread into multitudes of bread and little fishes into multitudes of fishes to feed multitudes of people. Then said they unto him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? Jesus answered unto them, this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he hath sent. Now, the word believe here can mean drink in, but he's talking more about eating here. Believe meaning either drink in. If you believe in something, you're actually either eating it or drinking it in by believing. So Jesus is saying, this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he hath sent. In other words, he's talking about, he goes on to say, except ye eat my flesh and drink my blood, ye have no life in you. Instead of coming to look for Jesus to eat bread and fishes, they should have been coming to Jesus to, as it turned out by the words of Jesus, except ye eat my flesh and drink my blood, ye have no life in you. So this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he hath sent. They said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers, again, they look at what they actually want Jesus to do is to get this manna from heaven, or get some more bread, some more fish. They're looking on the flesh. They're looking on at the economic prospects, it appears, of miraculous Jesus. Not so much the miraculous and the spiritual, but they're looking at the loaves and fishes. So they go on, and then they said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? They want Jesus to make some more bread. Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. So this prophet Moses, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. He performed these miracles. And he had the same problem with his people. He's trying to get them into the spirit, but they're getting more into the flesh. Moses performing all of these miracles through God's miraculous power and spirit to get them into the spiritual realities of life and to bring them to God. They looking at the flesh all of the time. Then said, Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven. Right? So you're getting your wires crossed. You're looking at this manna that came from heaven. You're missing the whole point in all of these miracles that I'm performing. These miracles that I'm performing are pointing to the miraculous spiritual reality of God. And they're not getting the point. They're looking at, they want this manna. Maybe Jesus is the one who's going to be like this prophet. He's going to bring down manna from heaven. He's going to feed them bread and turn loaves into thousands of loaves and little fish into thousands of fishes. Then Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven. You're missing the point. We were talking about the spiritual here. But my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. So they should be looking, going to find Jesus to get the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. This is Jesus, of course. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. What? You've missed the whole point again. Evermore give us this bread. You're getting you're looking at things back to front. You just got one track mind. You again just want the physical, the flesh, the bread. You're missing the whole point. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you that ye also have seen me and believe not. They didn't eat, they didn't drink in spiritually, they just simply saw the bread. They seemed to, these miracles that Jesus was performing, they seemed to be blind to the whole thing. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me will no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but to do the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which have sent me, that all of which ye have given me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last days. It's talking about the resurrection there. And this is the importance of eating Jesus' flesh and drinking his blood, because Jesus indeed rose from the dead. And if we eat his flesh and drink his blood spiritually, right, then we too will rise from the dead in the resurrection. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life. Now, this is everlasting life, right? This is life eternal. So we've got a spiritual manifestation here, right, as well as the physical. The physical manifestation is the resurrection, when indeed your body, this body here, will be resurrected and come back to life at the second coming of Jesus Christ. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be called up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And this corruptible will follow incorruption, this mortal will put on immortality, because we've eaten Jesus' flesh and drank his blood. What does this mean? This is why these people couldn't quite get what Jesus was saying. So he's saying, this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believe on him may have everlasting life. This is life eternal, right? This is life. This is the whole point in every conversation that Jesus had and every miracle that he performed, either the physical miracles or the spiritual miracles. But there was no physical manifestation, purely a spiritual manifestation. These words are coming straight from God, straight out of the mouth of God, straight out of the mouth of Jesus from God. And he's talking about the miraculous spiritual presence of God. And he's saying, look, I am the bread of life. This is what you should be coming out here to look for, not physical bread, not manna. So the Jews then murmured at him because he said, I am the bread of life, which came down from heaven. And they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he saith, I came down from heaven? Still ain't got the point. Jesus therefore answered and said unto them, murmur not among yourselves. No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. So again, he's talking about the resurrection. And so it goes on without going into every word. And so Jesus is still having the conversation, still trying to get spiritual thoughts into their mind. So verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. Once you believe in Jesus, in other words, believe meaning here to drink in, except ye eat my flesh and drink my blood. What does that mean? It means Jesus is going to give his life, our life. He came to die on the cross. In other words, the wages of sin is death, both spiritual death and physical death. Because Adam ate the forbidden fruit going back all those years ago, we've all inherited a body that's eventually going to die. We're going to have to go through physical death. If we get into the wrong spirit, we get into the flesh, then we get out of God's spirit, and therefore we get into the flesh. Therefore, we haven't got God's spirit in our hearts, in our lives. in our mind, in our thoughts, or we don't have God anywhere, as these men did here. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. I am the bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness of dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live for ever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. The Jews therefore strove amongst themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Jesus was talking symbolically. They didn't get it again. Then Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye have no life in you. He's talking here spiritual life. By believing in Jesus Christ, accepting his sin offering for mankind, then we can get into the spirit through symbolically, spiritually, eating his flesh in a symbolic sense. Believing that we getting out the spirit right is what Jesus came to get us into, not to get us out of the spirit, to get us back into God's spirit. And therefore, spiritual death is one thing, and physical death is another. And the most important thing here is to get into the spiritual aspects of spiritual life that Jesus came to give us. And this is what Jesus is trying to point out. This is life eternal. Yes, we're going to have a resurrected new body, the second coming of Jesus Christ, because we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And therefore, so will we. We'll all die eventually, but we will rise again in the resurrection as Jesus did. But spiritually, this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. So how does Jesus trying to introduce people to the miraculous, living, spiritual God? God is a spirit. And they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him, neither in this mountain nor in that place, but in the eternal Spirit of God. This is the whole point. Jesus introducing us to God is God himself. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Then Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man, and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoso eateth my flesh, and drinketh my blood, have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwelleth in me, and I in him. This is talking symbolically, spiritually, symbolically, that if we choose to believe in Jesus Christ and eat his flesh and drink his blood, in this same sense, and through simply believing, then you get into God's spirit, you get into God's spiritual presence, you get into the presence of Jesus Christ spiritually. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. As the living Father hath sent me, and I live by the Father, so he that eateth me, even he shall live by me spiritually again. This is that bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers did eat manna and are dead. He that eateth of this bread shall live forever. So that was the message here, a spiritual message from Jesus, simply doing his best to simply explain that he is the bread of life. And if we eat of the bread of life, if we eat his flesh and drink his blood, again, two symbolic ways of looking at things. One, he says he's the bread. Another, he says, eat my flesh and drink my blood, or you have no life in you. So in other words, to get back into God's spirit, seeing so many are out of God's spirit, we need to believe in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who came to show us the spirit, all of these various spiritual manifestations of God, either on a physical level or a spiritual level. And we running to Jesus, not to crown him as king of the flesh, to boost some economy, or even to make money, or whatever people have in mind, or to exalt him as the prophet. They've got their wires crossed because they didn't quite get what the prophet was supposed to do. The prophet would actually speak the absolute words of God as Jesus did. Jesus being the word of God. And Jesus going on to say here, the words that I speak unto you is the spirit that quickeneth. In other words, it's the spirit that maketh alive, not the flesh. It's the spirit that quickeneth, maketh alive. The flesh profiteth nothing. Too many people these days are going after the flesh, and it seems so many are getting all their wires crossed and they've missed the whole point. And the whole point is the spiritual point of all of these miracle and miraculous manifestations is that God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit, in the spirit of Jesus, and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him, neither in this mountain, nor in that place, so this religion or that religion, but in the eternal Spirit of God. You don't necessarily have to go to a temple or go to a church. You simply have to go and come to Jesus with the right motive in your heart, looking for the Spirit over the flesh. So that really was the message here, that Jesus was, and the reason why he performed all these miracles. And when they offered him this crown, he refused it. And this is what the danger, again, of the miraculous, that if God gives a prophet the miraculous, will that prophet point to God as being the miraculous coming from God? Or will he take all of the praise and credit and be called that prophet? And everyone exonerating him and exalting him as the long-awaited prophet. So there's prophets and there's prophets. In the last days, Jesus said, there be many false prophets. So that was the message here. The spiritual message here is something we can all get into, whether we ever perform a miracle in our whole lives, whether we even prophesy in our whole lives. There's one sure thing we can do, and that is to get into the Spirit of God by believing in Jesus Christ, by receiving Jesus Christ into our hearts. We can get into the spiritual message that Jesus was trying to get across here, that if we eat his flesh and drink his blood, then we'll have life in us. What kind of life? Spiritual life. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. So praise Jesus.